I've just disembarked a luxury 5-star cruise where I saw and did things that I've never experienced on a cruise before. Even though I've been cruising since I was 11 years old, this cruise took me by surprise and it changed my mind on a few things in ways I didn't expect. In the past, I've always cruised with budget or mainstream cruise lines. I normally cruise out of season and almost always in an inside cabin to make it as cheap as possible. Although I've always been interested in trying a luxury cruise, I never thought I would be able to afford one. That was until I saw a week-long cruise with a cruise line called Azamara for £819, including the flights and transfers from the UK. Usually luxury cruises are at least double, maybe triple this price, so I decided to give it a go. I was amazed to see that they did have inside cabins on this ship. Most luxury lines don't. There were only 23 inside cabins on the entire ship, but I managed to book one. I did wonder how they'd be able to make an inside cabin luxurious, if they even could, but finding out was all part of the fun. I didn't know if I would feel out of place on a luxury cruise. I wasn't sure if they had strict dress codes, and I didn't know if I would like a small ship like Azamara. I usually cruise on the cruise ships with 4,000, 5,000 passengers, and this ship only had 645 guests maximum. I knew that there was no theatre, there's no casino, there's definitely no water slides or go-karts, so I did wonder what the daily schedule would be like. Like with most cruises, this one didn't go exactly to plan. We had bad weather, we had port changes, and I had a big problem with my cabin. Embarkation definitely didn't get off to that luxury start. We were picked up by the transfer bus, which was fantastic, but from the time the bus dropped us at the terminal to us getting on the ship, it took over 2.5 hours. The only time I've ever embarked a cruise that took that long was the first cruise after the COVID shutdown. Normally embarking a cruise takes 10, 20 minutes, maybe 30 on a bad day, but 2.5 hours is pretty unheard of. For the first hour of waiting, we weren't actually allowed inside the terminal, so everybody just kind of sat around outside. I took the time to do a little bit of cruise ship spotting as we were docked in Barcelona. We were next to 2 Costa ships, one Ritz-Carlton yacht and one MSC ship. I'm definitely more used to cruising on cruise lines like MSC and Costa, but the Azamara Onward looked so cute and so amazing, I just couldn't wait to get on board. I also found out at this point that my friend Scott was on a seaborne ship that was docked just a little way away. I really hoped that our itineraries would cross over at some point in the next week. We'd been up since 4 AM at this point. We were very, very hungry. We didn't have any food. My brother actually fell asleep in the terminal at one point, so we were getting a little bit fed up. We just hoped that the ship would be worth the wait, and it goes to show that even luxury cruises, they have their own problems too. As soon as I walked onto the ship, that luxury element was obvious. I hadn't even got off the promenade deck yet, and a crew member came up to me to show me to my muster station. This is where you do your safety drill on a cruise, and usually you have to find your own way there. This time I had a crew member to take me to my muster, and they handed me a glass of champagne. I have never had champagne at a safety drill before. They explained to us what to do in the case of an emergency, and that was it. It was very, very easy. From that little bit I had seen of the ship, it looked very glamorous. Admittedly, I had only seen the staircase, but the staircase, it looked fantastic. At this point, we were getting pretty hungry. We'd only had champagne, so we headed up to the buffet. The tables in the buffet were beautifully laid out, and that is definitely not something that mainstream or budget cruise lines do. Usually, you'll just pick up your own knives and forks, you'll pick up your own cups, but here, everything was ready and it looked beautiful. As soon as we sat down, we were offered a drink. I ordered a Diet Coke, and I knew that drinks were included on an Azamara cruise, but at this point, I hadn't really worked out which drinks were included. I didn't want to spend any extra money on drinks if I didn't have to, and I did work my way through the included drinks list. I did find one bar on board where none of the included drinks were offered, which was really bizarre, but more about that later. The food in the buffet was the best food that I've ever had in a cruise ship buffet, and that was not just because they had vegan nuggets and jars of cookies. The cookies themselves, they were actually not fantastic, but the rest of the food was amazing. As well as the meaty dishes, there was so much vegetarian and vegan choice, and the dietary labellings were really, really good. If you were gluten-free, if you were dairy-free, you would have no trouble in this buffet. The staff were always there, they were so friendly, they were so helpful, and you don't even have to put your own toast in the toaster on an Azamara cruise. There's somebody there to do it for you. The buffet itself is quite small, but I found more things that I would like to eat in this small space than in a buffet that's 5 times as big on another cruise line. I thought that the food in the buffet was surprising, but it was even more surprising when I went to the main dining room for dinner later. We moved on to an area called the living room for a drink. It is this big, beautifully decorated lounge with a bar, there's some snacks, there's board games, there's books. Even just looking at the books, I could tell that this was a luxury cruise line. Most cruise lines will have some sort of library on board, but sometimes it's just the kind of leftover books that passengers have left behind. On this cruise though, every single book was a hardback, and some of them even had gold edges. Very nice. Looking at the menu, I found all of the included cocktails and the soft drinks, and there are a few wines and some beers too. You can upgrade to buy a more expensive drinks package, or you can just pay as you go if you want to order things that aren't included, but I just always ordered from that included list, and there was nothing I wanted that wasn't here. I didn't plan on spending any extra money on drinks, and I didn't want to spend any on excursions or on Wi-Fi. I was working during this cruise, but we were in port for long days and I could use my 4G. When I was in my inside cabin, I propped open my door like this and then the internet worked fine. I shared this on Instagram as like an inside cabin hack, and I had so many messages from people asking me why they couldn't do that in a balcony cabin. I mean, you can, but if you're in a balcony cabin, it probably makes more sense to open the door to the outside rather than into the corridor. It actually works surprisingly well, and most days we were in until 8 or 9 in the evening. We even had an overnight stay on this cruise, so it was fine. It was around then that I really started to look at the other guests. One of my biggest fears when it comes to luxury cruising is that everybody else will be very formal, will be very stuffy, but I saw then a lady wearing platform pink Crocs, and that suggested to me that maybe this wouldn't be the most formal cruise line. I didn't know though if that was just an embarkation day thing or if it would always be this casual. I found out at the end of the cruise that out of the total of 636 guests, 238 were from the UK, 132 were from the US, 53 were from Germany, and 52 were from Canada. In total, there were 33 different nationalities on this cruise, but everything was just done in English. English is the only and primary language on board. Next on the agenda was to find my cabin, and I did book the cheapest cabin on the cruise, and I was assigned cabin 7069. I will be bringing you a full video about this cabin, so if you want to know how the smallest shower I've ever had on a cruise worked in reality, just check below that you're subscribed. That video will be with you soon. While exploring the ship, I met a couple of friends who had a suite right at the back of the ship. They very kindly invited me to have a look around, and we were actually there at sail away. Their suite had this huge lounge, it had a bedroom with more storage than I could ever use, and it actually had 2 bathrooms. The balcony itself was absolutely huge, and the fog in Barcelona made it look very mysterious as we sailed away. Here's my mysterious cat, Hudson. At this point, I knew that I hadn't seen much of the ship, but I was pretty tired from my 4 AM start, so I decided to have a cup of tea and to call it a night. My plan for the next day was to properly explore the outside spaces, to try a main dining room dinner, and to see a show. I had no idea what the entertainment would be like, but I knew that there was no theatre, so I didn't really expect much. I slept for 14 hours, and I probably could have slept more than that if I didn't have my daylight alarm clock. I forgot to bring my daylight alarm clock on a recent cruise in an inside cabin, and my goodness, I really missed it. It lights up over a period of time so that when you wake up in your inside cabin, it means that you don't go from pitch black to turning the lights on. It really hurts your eyes. It is absolutely one of my favorite things that I own, and it wasn't expensive. I can't remember how much, but I'll put the link in the description. Unfortunately, me sleeping for 14 hours did mean that I had slept past the end of breakfast in the buffet. The buffet closed at 10 AM and the main dining room breakfast I think closed at 9:30. At that point though, I thought I might as well just wait for lunch, and to be honest, I'm glad that I did. Room service is free on Azamara, so I could have done that for breakfast, but to be honest, I don't like breakfast at the best of times, and it's not really as fun having room service in an inside cabin as it is having it on a nice balcony. There were 2 specialty restaurants on board that cost extra, but there's plenty of included food. As well as the room service, there is the main dining room, there's a buffet, and there is a poolside grill. Poolside grill really doesn't describe this well enough. The menu is absolutely huge and the food is incredible. The best burger I've ever had on a cruise, without a doubt. They had veggie hot dogs, burgers, loads of sides, and it fast became one of my favourite places on the ship, and I would sometimes come here to get nachos for lunch. It was right beside an ice cream machine and there were so many toppings here. I don't really eat ice cream, but sometimes I would just eat a cup of toppings. It was good. We never really had to wait long for anything, and Azamara do have a higher crew to passenger ratio than most of the mainstream cruise lines. On this cruise ship, 60 crew members would have to deal with 100 guests. If you compare that to a big cruise line like MSC, those same 60 crew members would be dealing with 156 guests. Our first port was Port Vende, and that was followed by Sète and Marseille, all in France. Later in the cruise, we actually had an overnight stay in Nice, and we were meant to visit Corsica, but things didn't exactly go to plan as the cruise went on. Our first port was a tendering port, meaning that the ship can't dock directly against the land, so guests have to use these little boats, which are usually lifeboats, to get to land. The big cruise ships quite often have tender ports, and on my recent Princess cruise we had 5. Sometimes it would take a couple of hours to wait for the tender, and I hope that because we were on a smaller ship we wouldn't have to wait for very long. We actually never had to wait at all, and on the way out there we almost had a tender to ourselves. I think there were 4 other people in that tender. It was about now that I started to work out what a luxury cruise is actually about. It's not just about the amazing food and the fantastic service and the ship, it's about never really having to wait in line for anything, and it is amazing. The port was a pretty little town, and we wandered to an old fort where we had amazing views of the ship. I did actually see the word baguette carved into the floor, which made me laugh. In England, a baguette is a very stereotypically French thing, and it actually leads me into the Britishism of the week. It is a French stick, otherwise known as a baguette. To me, growing up, this was always called a French stick. Everybody I know calls this a French stick, and I actually used to work with a friend who was French, and when he overheard the rest of us saying that we might get a French stick for lunch, he had never heard that before. He was so confused, but he thought it was absolutely hilarious. So this is a French stick. We didn't have to tender in Sète, and it was here that I found my fabulous friend Scott from the Scott Singer YouTube channel. Scott actually lives in Alaska and I live in the UK, so I always assumed that we would meet in one of those 2 places, but we met in France. He was cruising with Seabourn, which is an even more luxurious cruise. They're an ultra luxury cruise, and we were just a regular luxury cruise. We waved at Scott as he sailed away, you can see him here, and we managed to shout goodbye at each other. It was good fun. Next, we visited Marseille, which is the 2nd most populated city in France, and to my surprise, we docked right in the middle. Whenever I've visited Marseille in the past on a big cruise ship like the MSC Meraviglia, we've always docked miles away in an industrial port. I didn't even know that you could dock in the centre. That is one massive benefit of luxury cruising and small ships that I had just never considered before. I had heard that there wasn't much entertainment on an Azamara cruise, and as I'm used to cruising with the big American and the big British cruise lines, I did wonder if I would find it a bit boring. I did notice that they actually had the Downton Abbey movie playing 12 times on a loop. Fantastic if you like that movie, but it's safe to say I didn't really watch much TV on this cruise. And also the cabin TV was parallel to my bed. I normally lay in bed and watch TV, but you couldn't do that. We could check our onboard account on the TV though, which was really good. Azamara don't have any sort of app. They're not particularly a technical cruise line, but being able to check it on the TV, that was really helpful. We went to the first theatre show put on by the Azamara team, and I was very impressed. Despite not having an actual theatre, the show was as good as a theatre show. The only difference was that it was in a lounge and that there were only 6 people actually in the show. Because it was a small lounge though, we were very, very up close to the singers and dancers, which was pretty cool. It was the same 6 people in the entertainment team who also did trivia, they put up the Halloween decorations, they had many, many jobs, and they were such a friendly and happy bunch. They all seemed lovely. At this point, I did not know how involved our cruise director would be, but our amazing cruise director, Eric, he actually had his own show later in the cruise, and he skated around the dance floor. Yes, skated around the dance floor in a sparkly dress. That is dedication to the cruise director job that I have never seen before. Most of the other guests who I spoke to on board said that they like cruising on cruise ships of this size because they got to know the crew and they got to know their other guests. I guess that kind of is a blessing and a curse. If you meet new friends, you're going to see them everywhere, but also if you're trying to avoid somebody, that's not really going to work. You're going to keep bumping into them. Every evening there was at least one show in the lounge, and sometimes they would bring on local shows. It kind of reminded me of how they do that on river cruises. One day day when I was watching a show, a man sat next to me and started cutting away at paper with some scissors. I didn't really look at him, I just carried on watching the show, and then he handed me this. How incredible is this? He did this with just a pair of scissors, and he even managed to get the weird little flick of my hair in there. Although the ship was smaller, so there were less things happening at the time, every event I went to was very well attended, and the crew absolutely gave it their all. They went all out for all of the parties. We did have a white night party where the dance floor was full by the end of the evening, and we enjoyed a few included drinks. Unfortunately, the bad weather towards the end of our cruise did mean that they had to move the white party inside. That wasn't the only problem that the weather caused on our cruise, but more about that later. I was surprised to see that there were a few children and a few younger people on board. I've always kind of had the perception that luxury cruises have an older market, and to be honest, I think the average age on this cruise was younger than it has been on the mainstream cruise lines like Princess and Cunard that I've cruised with recently. It does of course depend on the itinerary, the time of year, how long your cruise is, but I never felt out of place on this cruise, and I met people who were younger than me. Azamara don't have any kids clubs, they don't have water slides, they don't have rock climbing walls or go-karts. It's not really a family cruise line. There were a few on my cruise, but speaking to the other guests, they said that there wouldn't normally be this many children on an Azamara cruise. And there were at most 10, probably 5 children, so normally less than that. Our next port was in Nice, and we were actually in Nice for 2 days. I have taken a cruise in the past which was advertised as 2 days in Amsterdam. We got into Amsterdam at 2 p.m. in the afternoon and we left at 10 a.m. the next day. Don't know about you, but to me that's one afternoon in Amsterdam and a night. I wouldn't class that as 2 days. On this cruise though, we got in at 8 a.m. and we left at 8 p.m. the next day. 2 full days in Nice. The sun was shining and we decided to head to Monaco on our first day in port. The train station was very easy to walk to and the train only took 17 minutes each way. From the station we could easily explore Monaco in a day because it is not very big. It's actually only 3 miles long and the population is 40,000. It is a tiny place. Monaco seemed to be this playground for rich people who love fast cars and gambling and yachts. I saw a lot of very glamorous people wandering around with bags that probably cost more than my house, but then you'd also see people like me who were just happy to be outside, wandering around wearing their trainers and a backpack and a drink that they bought from the ship. The soft drinks in the minibar on Azamara cruises are included and they're restocked every day, so quite often I would take those drinks out with me when I went out, and also you could just pick up bottles of water anytime. It's a luxury cruise, you don't have to pay. I'm so used to cruising on mainstream and budget cruises where they would charge you €3 for that, but on Azamara it's included. It's so nice. I will say though that this ship was built in 1999 and it wasn't really as luxurious as I expected, in the way that sometimes the cabinet doors would be hanging off, some of the public toilets, I don't know, it just didn't really feel very luxurious. And they had these kind of old style door handles, so there was no way to know if the stall was occupied or not. Nothing was ever a problem and it was very, very comfortable and very nice, but it just surprised me. I thought maybe they would have done more renovations when they took the ship over from Princess. On the second day in Nice, we decided to actually stay in Nice and we walked around the harbour, along the seafront and up to the castle on the hill. From here you can see just how close we docked. This is a massive, massive benefit of smaller ships. They can dock in places that the big ships just cannot fit in. It started to rain as we got back to the ship, but we had no idea how bad the weather was going to get. This is the announcement that our captain made.
If we were to call into Corsica tomorrow, on the way back we would be facing 8-metre waves. And this bad weather is covering most of this part of the Mediterranean. It's covering everything south of us, everything east of us, everything west of us. That said, there is a little bit of north left in this part of the Mediterranean and we've managed to secure a berth in Genoa for tomorrow.
I was looking forward to Corsica. It's somewhere that I've never been before, but I would definitely prefer to be somewhere else in the sunshine than stuck in Corsica in a storm. In the evening, we decided that we would check out the bars that we hadn't visited yet. Up until this point, we had spent most of our time in the living room where we would do trivia, in the carousel lounge where we would watch the shows in the evening, and also the Mosaic Cafe where we would get tea. We had settled into quite a nice routine and we would see the same people at the same times at the same kind of events. Trivia was a big one and there would be 2 trivias each afternoon and also more in the morning. Most of the trivia questions did seem to be relating to things that happened decades before I was born. We actually did win trivia at one point. We won 80s pop trivia, but we were much better at that than we were at 70s soul music or astronomy, all kinds of things we tried. We tried everything. You actually get prize points every time you go to trivia just for going, which I really loved, and these prize points you could exchange for prizes on the last day of the cruise. I actually had quite a lot, so I exchanged mine for a t-shirt and for a mirror, which I'm going to give away to my Patreons and channel members. If you hit the join button below this video, you'll be in for a chance of winning, and I do a giveaway like this every time I come back from a cruise. We decided to head up to a nice sounding bar called the Atlas Bar, and it was here that things got really weird. I saw that the menu was full of cocktails, but I didn't really think anything of it. It's pretty common to go on a cruise and find like a mojito bar or a Bellini bar. It doesn't mean that that's the only things that they do. Here though, we asked for a regular glass of wine, the wine that was included in the cruise, and we were told that there was nothing in this bar that we could have that was included. I have never encountered anything like that on a cruise before, a cruise that includes drinks everywhere apart from one bar. I suppose really it was like a specialty bar, but a big note on the door or the menu or something would have been nice because it was just very awkward. I didn't want to spend any money on drinks, I had drinks included, so we left and we went to another bar. Speaking to other people on the ship, they said that this area used to be a library, and to be honest I wish they kept it as a library because at least then I could have gone in it. There was one big main dining room on board and there were no fixed dining times, which I love. They actually have a full vegan menu that changes every single day. If you're vegetarian or vegan, just stop looking, book an Azamara cruise. I've never seen anything close to this level of options on any other cruise line. For me, it was the best food I've ever had on a cruise without a shadow of a doubt. My brother, who still eats meat, said that his meals were a similar quality to cruises he's had on P&O and Princess, but everything was very, very good. The service sometimes was a little bit slow, but we were not in a rush, and all of the crew was so nice. We like sitting by the windows and kind of looking out at wherever we were docked because normally we were still docked in the evening, and I have put together a full post of everything I ate on this cruise. Make sure you check that out, but not if you are hungry, not if you're hungry. The dress codes were very relaxed, and this is actually the only dress code that I saw for the entire cruise. Basically, as long as you're wearing nice jeans or clothes that aren't designed to go to the beach, you'll be totally fine. I kind of had it in my mind that a luxury cruise would have strict dress codes, but it seems to be the opposite. It seems to be people who take luxury cruises don't want to be told what to wear and when, and I absolutely agree with that. That suits me fine. When we docked in Genoa, Azamara actually put on a free shuttle into the town. I've docked in Genoa before, there's never been a free shuttle and I've always just walked, but because it was there we decided to get on and it was very useful. We actually did walk back, but that's the kind of thing that would normally cost extra on any mainstream or budget cruise line. Given the price that I paid for this cruise, I'm pretty sure that if you compared it to a mainstream cruise line, but then added on all the things that are included in Azamara, like the drinks, like the minibar, like the shuttles, I'm sure it would be pretty comparable, if not Azamara coming out better value. It was around now that the door in my cabin started to make a horrible loud noise. It honestly sounded like my cabin door was about to take off. I've never heard anything like it. Kind of like as if the door to the balcony had been left open and it was making a wind tunnel through our door, but we didn't have a balcony and it was like this for hours. It wasn't that somebody had left the door open. The ship was built in the late 90s, so it's not a surprise to me that sometimes things would break. I took a recording of the noise and I went down to reception, and the people working there were very helpful. They sent 2 people to my room and they had fixed the problem within an hour. It turns out that the strange noise was coming from the air conditioning because something was wrong with the vent, and basically it was just full pelt firing the air at the door. I think it's important not to think that everything will be 100% and nothing will ever go wrong just because you're taking a luxury cruise. Things still do break and you'll still find people who hog the sun loungers. Why they do that on a luxury cruise, I have no idea. There's so many sun loungers, but they do it and it's still just as annoying as it would be on MSC or Costa or Carnival or any other cruise line. I think it's so much more important how a cruise line deals with the problem rather than if a problem happens, and Azamara absolutely passed that test. They were fantastic. We docked next to the Regal Princess in Genoa, and it was amazing to stand on top of the Azamara Onward and be about middle deck on the Regal Princess. The Regal Princess is not one of the biggest princess ships, but she's still about 4 times bigger than the Azamara Onward in terms of gross tonnage. She's pretty big, or we were pretty small, or both. As much as I loved cruising on a small ship, I'm definitely not giving up the big cruise ships. To find out what it was like cruising on Britain's biggest cruise ship and why I actually booked this ship again while on the cruise, never done that before, but I did on this one, watch this video next.